The doctor said he was dying, but she gave him an heir and the greatest romance of his life. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to today's main character. The rain had been falling since dusk, turning the city into a sheet of cold glass. Outside the emergency wing of Sterling Memorial Hospital, ambulances came and went with their sirens muted by the storm. Inside, under the flat hospital lights, a man in a tailored charcoal suit stood motionless in a private consultation room. His name was Ethan Callahan, the billionaire hotel magnate whose name alone could move markets. His reflection in the window looked unshakable. His hands in his pockets did not tremble. Only his eyes betrayed the truth. He had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. The doctor's words still rang in his skull with surgical clarity. A degenerative neurological disease. Aggressive. No cure. A countdown instead of a future. 3 years if he was fortunate, less if he was not. Ethan had built an empire on strategy, timing, and control, but disease did not negotiate. Disease did not bargain. He pushed the door open and stepped into the corridor. The smell of antiseptic and wet coats clung to the air. He walked until the automatic doors opened to the night. Rain hit his face like cold metal. For the first time in years, the billionaire who survived every hostile takeover felt truly overpowered. He paused under the covered entrance, breathing through the panic that threatened to split his ribs. That was when he saw her. Across the driveway, under a dim cement overhang near the bus stop, a young woman sat with a small circle of strangers bundled in blankets. Her clothes were soaked, her hair sticking to her neck, but her voice was steady. She was reading aloud from a worn paperback to a group of homeless men and women who huddled close to hear her. Her name was Grace Whitmore. Ethan did not know that yet. He only saw a woman who had nothing, still giving something. Her voice carried through the rain, calm, warm, almost defiant against the night. Even in the dark, there are words that remember the light. The sentence lingered in the air. One of the older men coughed, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. Grace closed the book gently and smiled at him with a tenderness that cost her nothing to give. She reached into her coat and split the only sandwich she had into 2 halves, handing it away without hesitation. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had just been told that all his billions could not buy him more life. Then he watched a woman with nothing behave as if she still had everything that mattered. A security guard came out and barked at the group to move along. Grace did not argue. She stood, helped the old man to his feet, and shielded him with her coat while the rain hammered down. She remained upright, composed, and strangely dignified as the world treated her like someone disposable. Something in Ethan's chest shifted, not pity, recognition. The world broke some people and they still stood up straight. He exhaled slowly. His driver pulled the car to the curb, ready to take him back to his penthouse of glass and silence. Ethan did not get in. He watched Grace until she disappeared into the storm with the people she had been reading to. He had just been told he was dying. And yet, in the same hour, he had witnessed a kind of life that refused to collapse even when it should. He stepped into the car at last. The driver asked if he should take him home. Ethan did not answer right away. The rain streaked down the windows like a metronome for fate. He stared out into the night and said quietly, not to the driver but to the air itself, "Find out who she is." The city swallowed the words, but the decision had been made. The countdown had begun for his body, but something else had begun in him as well. Not hope, not yet. Something more dangerous than hope. A shift, a direction. He did not know her name. She did not know his world existed. But the night that delivered his death sentence had also delivered the only witness to his first human reaction in years. He did not want to die alone, and he did not want his empire to die with him. The rain kept falling, and fate continued without asking for permission. The following morning, Ethan Callahan returned to the private wing of the hospital for a follow-up consultation. The sky outside was still overcast, the kind of heavy gray that made even living men look terminal. Dr. Harris entered the room with the same quiet caution physicians use when they know a conversation is a wound, not a treatment. "We ran the confirmatory panel," Dr. Harris said, laying a folder on the desk. "There is no change in prognosis. The progression is fast. You need to start thinking in terms of legal arrangements, succession, and stability. Ethan stared without blinking. You told me yesterday what I have. Today, tell me what I can still control. Dr. Harris hesitated, then spoke with measured clarity. You can control who takes over your company. You can control where your wealth goes. You can control what happens to your name after you are gone. There it was, the word gone, spoken without apology. Ethan did not flinch, but something tightened in his jaw. Dr. Harris continued. You do not have children. You do not have a spouse. Without an heir or a legal spouse, control of your holdings will shift to the board or to your next of kin. I believe you know exactly what that means. Ethan pictured one face immediately. Damian Callahan, his half-brother, reckless, polished, and always circling his empire like a vulture that never sleeps. To let Damian inherit was not merely failure, it was desecration. Dr. Harris lowered his voice. You have time to put someone in place. Not much time, but enough to anchor your estate in a controlled direction. That is the only leverage you still have. The words landed like iron. Succession was no longer strategy. It was the last battlefield. When Ethan left the hospital again, the driver did not speak. The city moved past the car windows in slow motion, as if New Haven itself had shifted into morning speed. Ethan opened his phone and scanned the overnight board reports. The merger vote with the European Hospitality Group was scheduled for 12 days out. The media already speculated about instability. Investors were restless. If the board sensed weakness, they would tear him apart before disease did. At the next red light, the image of Grace Whitmore returned to his mind with an almost involuntary force. Her soaked hair, her steady voice, her hands splitting a sandwich in half for people who had nothing but cold pavement left. Ethan exhaled as if the memory itself burned. She had no reason to perform morality. She was not being watched. She was not asking for anything. Integrity without an audience is the rarest substance in the world. Ethan spent billions to detect lies in boardrooms. Then fate had shown him the truth standing under a bus shelter with wet shoes. He looked at the reflection of himself in the window of the car. The strongest man in the building last night had been a woman with nothing left to lose. Minutes later, he entered Hale Tower through the executive entrance. The board chair, Marcus Benton, was waiting near the elevator with his arms folded, expression already hostile. We need to speak, Marcus said. Then speak, Ethan replied without slowing. Marcus matched his pace. Investors are nervous. The merger committee is nervous. The press is circling. You need to show stability, a wife, an heir, or a succession plan. If you do not, the board will move to vote you out before the merger closes. Ethan pressed the elevator button. You are threatening the man who built the company you stand in. No, Marcus said coldly. I am telling you the cost of uncertainty. A man with no future cannot own the future of others. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped inside without a word. Marcus did not follow. By the time Ethan reached the top floor, the decision was no longer abstract. It was a mathematical fact. Without a wife and a designated heir, everything he built would be seized by people who had never carried the weight. He sat at his desk and opened a blank legal directive. His hand hovered over the screen, but instead of writing, his mind returned again to the woman in the rain. Grace Whitmore. Integrity under pressure. Dignity without witnesses. A spine that did not collapse in the cold. He had seen thousands of women in designer gowns rehearsing morality for cameras. Last night, he saw one human being living it without applause. His phone lit up with a notification from his head of security. License plate camera footage retrieved. Identity match in progress. Ethan closed his eyes once, deliberately. He did not need to know her history to know her nature. He needed a contract, not a dream, a marriage, not a romance, a shield, not a soulmate. But the universe had just handed him a woman who could be all three without trying. He opened his eyes and gave the order that would alter both of their lives. Find her, and bring her to me. It took less than 24 hours for Ethan Callahan's instruction to bear fruit. By late afternoon, his head of security entered the office with a folder and a single sentence. We found her. Ethan did not open the file immediately. He simply said, bring her in tomorrow morning. No police tone, no intimidation. She comes voluntarily or not at all. Grace Whitmore arrived at the building the next day, guided by a private driver who addressed her with courteous distance. She looked out of place in the lobby of Hale Tower, a skyscraper of glass and power where every surface reflected wealth. Her clothes were clean, but modest. Her hair was pulled back without vanity. She clutched the strap of her worn canvas bag as if it were armor. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Ethan was already standing at the far end of the room, facing the window. The skyline behind him looked like a throne made of steel. He did not turn when she entered. "Sit," he said. Grace remained standing. "You sent someone to fetch me without telling me why. I do not sit until you tell me what this is." Ethan turned then. His face held the same cold precision as the night he left the hospital, but there was no cruelty in it, only intent. "I am not here to waste either of our time," he said. "I am going to make you an offer that you are not obligated to accept, but you will listen to it in full." Grace met his stare without flinching. "Then say it." Ethan walked to the desk, opened a folder, and slid a document across the table without theatrical pause. "I need a wife." Grace blinked once, slowly. "That is not an offer. That is a sentence without context." "It is a contract," Ethan said. "A fixed-term marriage. You would be financially secured for life. In return, you would stand beside me as my legal spouse for a defined period of time." Grace's eyes hardened. "You want to purchase a human being?" "No," Ethan said, and his voice did not rise. "I want to buy time, and I want to protect what I built from people who will destroy it when I am gone." The word "gone" trembled between them like a second unspoken sentence. Grace understood enough to recognize that this man was not acting out of vanity. She folded her arms. "Why me?" Ethan did not pretend to soften the truth. "Because you have already lost everything, and yet you kept your integrity. You are not here for money. You are not impressed by people like me. You told the truth when no one was watching. That makes you incorruptible." The room went silent. The rain tapped the glass as if affirming the claim. Grace looked at him with a steadiness that almost read as pity. "And what happens to me when the contract ends?" "I disappear. I go back to nowhere while your world moves on." Ethan's reply was surgical. "If you agree, you will never return to nowhere. Housing, debt, medical burdens, your entire financial future will be resolved in advance and insulated permanently. You will not leave worse than you entered." Grace swallowed once, not out of greed, but out of the shock of hearing security offered like an item on a shelf. "And the rules?" she said. "There are always rules." "Yes," Ethan answered. "No personal questions, no emotional entanglement, no interference in my business dealings. Appear at public obligations when scheduled. When the term ends, there is a clean exit." Grace raised her chin. "So I become an object of display, a shield against the world." "You become a wall between my legacy and the people who would dismantle it," Ethan said without shame. "And in exchange, you get a life no one can strip from you again." For the first time, a flicker of anger lit in her voice. "You assume desperation guarantees compliance." "No," Ethan said. "I assume desperation makes clarity possible. You are not a romantic. Neither am I. This arrangement does not require belief, only agreement." Grace stood very still, absorbing the violence of a decision that did not involve touch or threat, only logic sharpened to a blade. She was a woman who had been crushed by the world without losing her spine. Now the world was asking her to trade her spine for safety. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She simply looked at him and spoke with a voice that was calm enough to cut. "I will consider your contract. But if I sign it, understand this clearly: you are not buying my soul. You are buying time. And time has a way of changing men." Ethan did not argue. He only answered with the quiet certainty of a man who had already wagered his life. "That is exactly what I am counting on." Grace did not answer Ethan that day. She left Hale Tower with the same steady spine she had walked in with, but something in her pulse ran like a fault line under the surface. That night she lay awake in the shelter, listening to the shallow sleep of strangers breathing around her. The rain outside tapped the roof in a slow, merciless rhythm. She replayed every word Ethan spoke, not as a proposition but as an X-ray of her future. He had not lied. He had not charmed. He had not begged. He had placed before her the most brutal form of mercy, a bargain that would save her life at the cost of her freedom. By the next morning she returned. She did not wait to be escorted. She walked back into Hale Tower as if she belonged to the building by sheer will. When she entered Ethan's office, he did not stand, did not widen his eyes, did not register surprise. He only closed the lid of his laptop with finality, as if he had been expecting this precise hour. Grace spoke first. "I will sign." Ethan did not smile. He opened the folder as if he were concluding a merger. "There are 5 rules. You will read them aloud before you sign." Grace took the document and read each line with a voice devoid of tremor. No personal questions. No emotional attachment. No interference in business affairs. Public appearances when instructed. A clean exit upon completion of term. She lowered the page. "And the term." "1 year," Ethan answered. "Renewal only by mutual written consent." Grace nodded once. "There is one condition of my own." "State it," Ethan said. "When the contract ends, I leave with my dignity intact. No narrative, no press, no retaliation, no erasure." "You leave with anonymity protected and your security guaranteed," Ethan replied. "No one will be permitted to distort your existence." Grace picked up the pen. She did not hesitate, and she did not breathe theatrically for effect. She signed with the same decisiveness she used when she once graded papers, a clean stroke that did not shake. Ethan signed second. His signature was precise, final, almost surgical. When the last page closed, the contract did not feel like ink on paper. It felt like a door with no handle on the inside. Ethan rose from his chair. "You move into the residence today." Grace did not flinch. "I brought nothing." "That is the point," he said. A separate car drove her to the Callahan estate. The mansion did not rise like a house, but like a verdict carved into stone. The staff stood aligned in a silent row when she entered: housekeeper, security chief, private chef, personal assistant. Their eyes held curiosity without permission to speak it. The housekeeper led Grace through corridors of glass and marble. The air did not smell like people. It smelled like polish and control. Every painting, every clock, every surface looked arranged to prevent life from expanding. Silence followed them like a rule. Her assigned bedroom was larger than the school library where she once taught. The windows overlooked a terrace that faced the wood. In the corner stood a walk-in closet already filled with clothing in her size, chosen by someone who knew measurements but not identity. The bed was too white to belong to a living person. The housekeeper placed a folder on the desk. "This is your schedule for appearances. Breakfast is served at 8. Mr. Callahan prefers punctuality. The West Wing is restricted." Grace answered with one word. "Understood." When she was finally alone, she stood still, not touching anything. The quiet was so complete, it felt engineered. She opened her canvas bag. It held 2 shirts, a notebook, and a worn paperback of poetry. She placed the book on the bedside table like a relic of the life she was not allowed to show. At 8 sharp, she entered the dining hall. Ethan sat at the head of a long table built for 20 but set for 2. He did not look up as she approached. A butler poured water into her glass and withdrew like a shadow. Ethan spoke without greeting. "This house has rules beyond the contract. You do not enter the West Wing. You do not speak to staff unless necessary. You do not alter the structure of the home." Grace cut her food with methodical care. "Understood." "You will attend the charity gala in 3 nights," Ethan continued. "You will be introduced as my wife. Your only task is composure." Grace lifted her gaze. "I know how to stand upright in a room that does not want me in it." For the first time, Ethan paused. The line did not challenge him. It defined her. Dinner ended without small talk. Ethan left the room without dismissal. The staff cleared the plates without sound. Grace remained seated for a moment, surrounded by wealth that felt colder than rainwater on asphalt. She whispered to herself, not as rebellion, not as prayer, but as a statement of fact. Time changes men. Upstairs, down the hall and behind a closed door, Ethan heard none of it. But the contract had begun, and contracts have a way of rearranging the people who sign them, regardless of intention. Grace woke before the Sunday. The mansion at dawn did not sound like a place where people slept. It sounded like a museum that tolerated breathing. She dressed in silence and walked toward the kitchen, not to interfere but to occupy time until breakfast. The staff froze when she entered, as if her presence violated an unwritten perimeter. The young kitchen assistant dropped her gaze immediately and continued slicing fruit with stiff shoulders. Grace did not speak at first. She poured herself a glass of water and stood by the counter. The silence was not ordinary. It was engineered obedience. She looked at the assistant and said gently, "You do not have to stop working because I am in the room." The girl nodded without lifting her head. Her hands trembled slightly on the knife. A human instinct surfaced in Grace the way breath surfaces in a drowning lung. She reached for a paper towel and held it out. "You are holding your breath," Grace said. "Exhale or you will cut yourself." The girl finally looked up, startled not by authority but by recognition. She exhaled without meaning to. The tension in her wrist eased. For 2 seconds, something human cracked through the house's choreography before it sealed shut again. Before the assistant could answer, a low voice came from the doorway. "This is not a classroom." Ethan stood there in a dark suit, sleeves uncreased, expression unreadable. His presence canceled the room like a command. Grace set the towel down. "People forget how to breathe when they are afraid." This house does not run on emotion," Ethan replied. "It runs on precision." Grace met his eyes without apology. "Then precision is suffocating your staff." He did not argue. He only turned to the butler. "Breakfast. Dining room. Now." The staff vanished from the kitchen in seconds, like birds trained not to show flight. At the table, Ethan unfolded the newspaper without looking up. "You are here to fulfill a contract, not to rehabilitate the emotional climate of this house." And Grace cut her toast with calm hands. "I am not rehabilitating anyone. I am speaking to human beings like human beings." Ethan's jaw flexed, but his tone remained even. "Your influence is already altering the environment. That was not part of the agreement." Grace answered with a measured quiet. "You cannot bring another human being into a sealed vault and expect the air to remain unchanged." Ethan set the paper down slowly. "I do not need philosophy at my breakfast table." You need oxygen," Grace said. "Everyone in this house does." The butler entered to refill water. Ethan noticed the way the man avoided eye contact only after Grace's words had made him aware of it. Awareness was a crack. Cracks spread. After breakfast, Ethan left for meetings downtown. Grace remained in the mansion with nothing to do except exist inside its architecture of silence. She walked through the hall that led to the terrace. The windows looked out over acres of manicured order, but order without warmth looks indistinguishable from exile. Near the pantry, she noticed a small whiteboard leaning unused against the wall, the kind used by staff for inventory notes. On instinct, she lifted it and wiped the faint ghost of old writing off the surface. She uncapped a black marker and wrote a single word in block letters. "Breathe." She did not announce it. She did not explain. She set the board beside the coffee station where the staff would see it. By early afternoon, someone had circled the word softly in pencil, as if afraid to erase or endorse it. The word remained, and silence remained, but something inside the silence had shifted 2 degrees. When Ethan returned that evening, the board was still there. He stopped when he saw it, not because he cared about the word, but because he recognized the intention behind it. He turned his head slowly toward the security camera in the corner. Its angle had been adjusted slightly toward the kitchen, as if someone wanted proof of chain. Grace entered the room behind him, unaware he was still standing there. She saw his gaze on the board but did not retreat. "You are turning my house into a therapy ward," he said. "No," Grace replied. "Your house was already a ward. I am turning it back into a place where living organisms can function." He looked at her the way a man looks at a flame in a dry forest, not with admiration, not with dismissal, but with the uneasy knowledge that ignition is possible. "Remember the rules," Ethan said. "I remember all 5, Grace answered. "None of them forbid oxygen." He said nothing else. He walked away, but the board remained where she put it, unerased. Houses do not change with declarations. They change when one uninvited breath becomes impossible to reverse. The first fracture in his control had already been made, and it was not loud. It was a word on plastic, inked by a woman he did not plan to feel. 3 days later, the city glittered under a sky of cold stars. The annual Sterling Foundation Gala filled the ballroom of the Grand Regency Hotel, a cathedral of glass and gold that smelled faintly of money and ambition. Inside, hundreds of guests in tailored suits and sequined gowns floated through the room with champagne glasses balanced like trophies. Flashbulbs flickered like lightning. Ethan Callahan arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, as punctual as the board expected. His tuxedo was immaculate, his composure carved from marble. Beside him walked Grace Whitmore Mrs. Callahan by legal definition, a mystery by every other measure. Her gown was a deep navy that moved like water under the chandeliers. The soft light caught the silver pendant at her throat, the only piece of jewelry she owned before the contract. When they entered, the room tilted toward them as if pulled by gravity. Ethan leaned close enough for her to hear, but not for the cameras to record. "Smile, but not too wide. They can smell nerves." Grace whispered back without moving her lips. "I am not nervous." He almost believed her. They moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting compliments, nodding at investors who measured worth in posture and tone. At first, the evening followed the script. Polite laughter, predictable questions, subtle photographs. But every story needs a moment when control falters. That moment came when a familiar voice called out behind them. "Ethan, you never told me you married an educator." Grace turned. The woman approaching was tall, elegant, and sharp enough to cut glass. Vivienne Carter, former head of corporate strategy, former fiancé. Her smile was shaped like strategy itself. Ethan's expression did not change. "Vivienne," he said evenly, "I did not think you still attended our events." "I never miss a spectacle," she said. Then, to Grace, "And you must be the wife we did not know existed. Quite an achievement, going from community shelters to the penthouse in a single signature." The words were coded in charm, sharpened underneath. A small circle of listeners froze, waiting for the scene. Grace's pulse tightened, but her face stayed calm. She placed her champagne glass on a tray and answered softly enough that only those nearest could hear. "Some people climb ladders to look down," she said. "Others climb to see farther. I prefer the second kind." The air shifted. A few guests exchanged glances. Even the photographer hesitated before clicking the next shot. Vivienne's smile thinned, but she recovered. "Clever," she said. "Let us see how long the altitude agrees with you." Ethan's voice cut through the tension like steel through silk. "Vivienne, you are out of practice. You used to deliver insults with more finesse." She blinked, momentarily unarmed. He turned to Grace. "Shall we?" They walked away before anyone could react. Behind them, whispers rippled through the ballroom like static. Grace kept her eyes ahead, but her heart pounded so hard she thought the sound might echo against the marble floor. Ethan leaned slightly toward her as they reached the quieter corridor near the balcony. "That was not part of the plan," he said. Grace looked at him. "Neither was humiliation." He stopped walking. For the first time since their marriage began, she saw emotion flash across his face. Not anger, but something close to guilt. "She should not have spoken to you that way," he said. "She did," Grace replied. "And it did not kill me." Inside the ballroom, a reporter's voice carried faintly through the door. "Mr. Callahan, may we get a quote about your wife's remarkable composure?" Ethan and Grace re-entered the room side by side. Cameras turned like flowers toward sunlight. A journalist asked, "Mrs. Callahan, how does it feel to stand beside one of the most powerful men in the country?" Grace smiled, calm and measured. "Power is not something you stand beside," she said. "It is something you learn to carry without losing yourself." The microphone trembled slightly in the reporter's hand. For a heartbeat, the entire room paused, suspended in the echo of words that did not belong to public relations. Later, in the limousine, the silence between them was not cold. It was alive, charged with new awareness. Rain streaked across the tinted windows, blurring the city into silver. "You should not have had to defend yourself," Ethan said quietly. "I did not," Grace answered. "I defended the truth." He looked at her reflection in the window. The woman who had entered his life as a transaction was now shaping the air around his name. For the first time, Ethan realized he was not leading this contract anymore. He was following it. When the car reached the estate, he stepped out first and opened her door, not as obligation but as instinct. Grace hesitated, caught between surprise and understanding. He held her gaze for one unguarded second before saying softly, "Good evening, Mrs. Callahan." She answered, "Good evening, Mr. Callahan," and walked past him toward the house. Behind them, the storm broke over the city, washing the night clean. Inside that sound, the balance of power between them began to shift, subtle as breath, but irreversible as truth. The house was silent when they stepped inside. The staff had already retired to the service wing, and the hall lights were dimmed to a low amber glow. Grace moved toward the staircase without speaking. Ethan remained near the entrance, undoing his cufflinks with restless precision. Just before she reached the landing, he said, "You changed the narrative tonight." Grace stopped but did not turn. "I did not perform," I answered. "You did more than answer," Ethan said. "You stabilized a vote I was on the verge of losing." She looked down at him from the top of 3 steps, her voice steady. "That was not my intention." "Intention is irrelevant," he said. "Impact is what the world remembers." Grace held his gaze a long moment, then continued upstairs. Ethan watched her until she disappeared from sight. He stood alone in the foyer, long after the light upstairs went dark. The next morning, The newspaper headline lay on the dining table before she arrived. Callahan's wife silences critics with one-sentence markets rally overnight. She read it without touching the page. Ethan entered a moment later, coffee in hand. "You made the front page," he said. Grace did not look up. "I was not campaigning." "Honesty does not campaign," Ethan replied. "It detonates." She set the paper aside. "If you brought me into this house to be a symbol, then symbols have consequences you do not get to choose." Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not offense, not victory, something quieter. "You are right." It was the first time he had said those words to her. Breakfast ended in silence, but not the familiar sterile kind. This silence had weight, like a space being prepared for something unscripted. By late afternoon, Ethan returned from a meeting early. He found Grace in the library, seated near the tall window, reading to herself in the same calm cadence she had used under the hospital overhang the night he first saw her. Her voice did not belong in a house built to muffle sound. It made the room feel inhabited instead of occupied. When she closed the book, she noticed him standing behind her. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "Long enough," he said. He walked closer but did not sit. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of the metal edge. "I did not choose you because I needed a wife. I chose you because I needed someone who would not bend under the weight of my name." Grace met his eyes without blinking. Contracts do not protect men from their own hunger. Eventually, they crack. "They already have," Ethan said. The admission landed between them like a fracture line finally spoken aloud. He was no longer the man executing a controlled transaction. He was a man confessing an unintended cost. Grace exhaled once, not in weakness, but in recognition. "Then you should decide whether you are afraid of the crack or grateful for it." Ethan did not answer. He simply stood there, no longer armored, looking at the woman who had undone his rules without violating a single one. The contract remained on paper, but inside this room, the paper had already lost authority. For 2 days after that conversation in the library, the house did not behave the same. No rule had been rewritten on paper, but something invisible had altered its temperature. The staff spoke in normal human tones instead of hushed obedience. The kitchen lights stayed on 10 minutes longer in the morning because laughter brief and uncertain had returned there. Even the way footsteps traveled through the hall seemed different, as if the floor itself had remembered sound. Ethan noticed all of it. He also noticed that Grace no longer looked like a guest wearing borrowed space. She moved through the mansion with the posture of someone who refused to shrink to fit its coldness. Control had not collapsed, but it was no longer absolute. That evening, rain swept back over the city. Grace stood on the balcony outside the library with a shawl around her shoulders, watching lightning thread across the clouds. Ethan joined her without announcement. He stood beside her, not too close, not too far a distance that implied neither command nor retreat. "You are outside again in a storm," he said. "It is when the world tells the truth," Grace replied. He looked at her profile, lit by the flicker of sky. "You think I am afraid of truth? I think you have built a life to avoid hearing it," she said gently, not as an attack but as diagnosis. He did not deny it. He spoke without armor. "My father died at 46. My brother waited less than an hour after the funeral before trying to seize his shares. I learned then that any softness is an invitation to be replaced." Grace did not look away. "Protection is not the same thing as exile. You protected yourself until you became unavailable to your own life." The rain thickened, a hard silver curtain beyond the railing. Ethan's voice dropped to the register of confession without sentiment. "If I die without a wife and an heir, Damien inherits everything. He will dismantle the company within 5 years and sell the carcass. I cannot let my life's work become that man's weapon." "So you hired a shield," Grace said. "Yes," Ethan answered, and the shield began acting like a person. Grace did not smile. "A shield that breathes will eventually ask why it was forged." His eyes stayed on hers. "Then ask." Grace inhaled once. "What happens when the contract ends and there is not a shield left? Only a woman who walked into your life and changed what you refused to change yourself?" Ethan did not speak. The answer existed, but speaking it would collapse the last wall. A gust of wind drove cold rain sideways across the balcony. Grace stepped back toward the doorway. Before she crossed inside, she said one more thing. Not sharp, not pleading, only true. "Rules do not survive contact with reality. Something will break before this ends, either the contract or you." She walked back into the house, leaving the storm and the sentence behind. Ethan remained under the rain long after she disappeared from view. He did not move, because the words were not water. They were impact. The crack was no longer a line, it was an opening. And openings, once made, do not close themselves. The storm did not break until dawn. When Ethan finally came inside, his suit was soaked through and his shoulders looked heavier than the sky itself. He did not go to his room. He went to the study and remained there until morning, seated in the dark with the contract open before him like a relic of a former logic. By the time Grace came down for breakfast, the house was too quiet even for that house. On the dining table lay the contract not in a folder, not hidden laid flat with a fountain pen resting across it. Ethan stood at the end of the table, not reading, not performing. He spoke first. "You were right. Something has to break." Grace did not sit. "What did you decide?" Ethan looked at her directly, not with authority, but with the clarity of a man no longer pretending to be invulnerable. "I am not letting a countdown dictate the last chapter of my life. I am not letting Damien inherit my name. And I am not finishing this contract with a woman who is already more wife in truth than she ever was on paper." He picked up the contract and tore it once, straight through the signatures. The sound was small but final. "No more rules," Ethan said. Grace's breath caught, not in shock but in recognition of a shift that could not be reversed. "If there are no rules, then what remains?" "A choice," Ethan answered. "Not obligation, not transaction. A choice to stay if staying is what you want, without conditions." Grace studied him. "And if I stay, do you intend to live or only to last?" "To live," Ethan said without hesitation. "To fight the disease with whatever time medicine can buy. To build a future that is not made of fear, not alone." Silence held for one long beat, not empty, not cold, filled with the weight of a decision forming inside her chest. She walked to the table, took the torn halves of the contract, and folded them once. Then she looked up. "I stay by choice," Grace said. "Not as a shield, not as a contract, as your wife." It was not dramatic. It was exact. Ethan closed his eyes once, as if something inside him unclenched for the first time in years. When he opened them, the fear was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. The house exhaled with them, not literally, but unmistakably, as if architecture itself recognizes when a story changes states. At the window, the last of the storm cleared, and the morning light broke clean across the glass. Not a miracle, not a rescue, a beginning chosen, not coerced.